again, everyone. It's good to have you with us for this event. It figures to be an exceptional one that doesn't need any build-up.
Are you ready?
Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop fighting.
This is the main event of the evening.
Athletes, huddle up. It's time to begin. Get focused. Let's go. Athletes, take your mark. Get set. It's time for the Addict to Athlete podcast. Everybody out there, Coach Blu Robinson here. Thank you so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. We so greatly appreciate you doing so. As always, keep an eye on the website, addicttoathlete.org. Find all kinds of content, backlog podcasts, content for your recovery, information on how to pursue that lifestyle of sobriety. Athletes, continue to watch that website specifically for our upcoming events. We have the No One Left Behind event coming up in June, and also the Proxy Run, our Addict to Athlete official 5K we have every September to remember those who have lost their battle to addiction and mental health. Athletes, today we got a special opportunity to re-release a podcast that we did several years ago with Dr. Blake Rapier. This is probably one of the most profound podcasts that we've had in our catalog, specifically because of the information that's given. Dr. Rapier is an amazing individual who has really dedicated a lot of his focus to help people with addiction. And the way that he describes the brain and the brain subsets and how they all work together when battling addiction is so amazing. We wanted to re-release this podcast because we just don't think it has the numbers that it needs to have. Dr. Rapier is an amazing individual who practices here in the Utah County area. But really, the content that he describes here is so amazing that we wanted to re-release it at this time just to give you guys a little bit more information. If you haven't heard this one in a long time, please re-listen and share this with anyone who might be struggling with understanding the components and the complexity of addiction. Without further ado, he's Dr. Blake Rapier, one of our post-podcasts from several years ago. I hope you enjoy it. Athletes, we got a great show for you today. I'm excited to have a guest in our studio. This is Dr. Blake Rapier. He is the Assistant Medical Director at Ardue Recovery in Provo, Utah. Blake comes from a deep history of service in his community and specializes in addiction medicine to assist individuals that come to Ardue learn more about the addictive brain. We're grateful to have him in studio. Say hello.
Hello, everybody. I'm Blake Rapier, and it's just Blake. Please refer to me as Blake.
Okay, we'll do it. So, brother, tell us a little bit about yourself, about what interested you in the world of addiction, what kind of moved you from that family practice into kind of being really in the trenches with the world of addiction.
I was afraid you were going to ask that, actually. I practice medicine. I have been practicing medicine for almost 14 years now. Originally trained in family medicine and had a clinic, and things were going really well. I did my addiction fellowship, and shortly after that, I was approached to help open this facility to do detox medicine and help people in recovery. At first, I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. And I thought, no, I don't want to do something like that. I had a thriving practice. I was the largest producer in the practice. Things were going really well.
Yeah.
I was approached by our director of nursing to say, hey, would you be interested in something like this? And I immediately thought, well, no, I mean, I'm part owner of this practice.
Got my hands full over here.
Good, yeah. And it just didn't seem to go away. And it didn't go away, and it didn't go away. My wife noticed, and she said, well, why are you worried about this?
Right.
And I said, well, I keep thinking about it, but I've never thought that I would go and work in a facility like this, not having been in recovery myself. And and I hope I don't overstep any bounds or offend any of our listeners, but she finally looked at me and she said, well, you pray about everything, so why don't you just pray about it?
Yeah, so why aren't you doing that?
Right. Mm-hmm. And so I did, and I got a real strong impression that, I think sometimes these are considered the lepers of today.
Absolutely.
Individuals in recovery, and all of a sudden it really bothered me.
Mm-hmm.
And that very day, I walked into my family clinic and I looked at my partners and I said, hey, I'm leaving. And they said, wait, no, you're not. You can't. And we had to have some conversations. And I went and helped them set up this medical detox and wrote the protocols and the procedures and for that. And then have been there ever since. I sit on the executive board with them. And then I actually do all the patient care in the facility.
That's amazing. So I like that you likened the addiction and those addicted as to the modern day lepers, because that's exactly how I viewed them as well. Meaning there's been so many that don't know how to help or try to ignore the problem and that just gets worse and worse over time.
Right.
And I also think it's great that your understanding of the concept of you've never struggled with a chemical dependency or an addiction like they have. And we talked about this before we started recording, and I like that to a certain degree because, my wife, who is an amazing individual, who's a rec therapist, who helps me do groups all the time, she's never struggled either. But she went through the same pain and anguish and turmoil that I went through to a certain degree, but handled it differently.
Right.
So you actually kind of have a different way of dealing and coping with, with life and with stress.
Right. And that's actually one of the concerns I had going into the field was, do I have validity? Do I have the life experience? But I've recognized one of the things recently that's actually starting to frustrate me is I've become very aware of how this patient population has been treated by medical professionals like myself.
Thank you.
And I'm it's really discouraging. I was trained that no matter what the lifestyle or the background of a patient, they got your best care.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if they were president of the United States to a homeless person, they got everything that was the best of you. And I think over time we develop these thought processes that are inappropriate.
Right.
These judgments, and we don't even realize we have them.
Yeah.
And it's been really sad for me to sit with patients knee to knee and toe to toe and visit and talk, and they're very leery of me almost at first.
I would imagine.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's kind of weird.
Because it's different.
Right. And then as they go through their detox or as they stay in residential care and I interact with them and do their general medical, they just open up and they flourish. And I've often talked to my wife about this, and like I said, it's frustrating to me that we've gotten to this point in our society where we say this is different or less or right. And it's not.
Right.
And that's where I think why that term came to me in my head as I was thinking about doing this was that good, sound healthcare should be there for people in any facet of life or struggling in anything that they have. And so it's actually turned out to be strength, I think, where they say that there are people that care.
Right.
Maybe we haven't experienced the same things.
Right.
In the fact of coping skills, but we have experienced the same things in life
And emotion.
and the hurt and the pain and the difficulty. And I think it goes a long way for them to honestly look at a healthcare provider and then start to trust and say, hey, even people that aren't in recovery want to help me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You say that, and it's interesting. Over the last probably 2 or 3 weeks, I've heard that issue specifically from probably 2, maybe 3 people.
Yeah.
Specifically about how, and I don't know if this is their perception, but one was talking to me about when she had her baby, and on the history, and as they were coming in and doing all the paperwork, have you ever had an addiction? Well, yes. And all of a sudden she said that when they learned that she was an ex-heroin addict, she said that I felt like I was treated differently. And I'm like, well, yes and no, maybe not. But they felt like it was a kind of an us against them, that shame-based stuff. What you just mentioned is so crucial because I think there's that misconception because doctors get a bad rap. Everything that's going on in the pharmaceutical company, right? It all comes down to the doctor. And it's like, we've got to change that perspective too. And put some responsibility on the person seeking or needing help, but also for you to help educate a little bit more, to spend a little bit more time to get a better understanding because it's a big deal that relationship. It's probably more important, I would say, than relationships with a therapist, with a doctor, because you are the person that kind of helps get their toe into the door, kind of understand where this addiction's coming from, and you can stop pain. We live in a world that people don't want to deal with pain, right?
Right.
I mean, extra strength Tylenol, maximum strength bear, it's all the same stuff, but we want our headaches gone now. So how is you being trained in addiction medicine and just in addiction in itself, how's it benefited you to take your time and to understand the complexities beyond the medical model?
Yeah, let's talk about that. And that's, and to what you were saying earlier, I think that judgment goes both ways.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think the healthcare provider, the doctors the nurses can be judgmental in a sense. But I remember talking to a patient, and the first few interactions that we had, she was very leery and she was very unwilling to open up. And after a while, I said, I can tell that you had a tough time at first. And she said, well, yeah, I don't trust you.
Yeah.
And I said, why? She goes, you're a doctor. And I was like, what's interesting is, but you don't know me.
Exactly.
Right? And I'm trying to get to know you. And I said, why don't we hold our judgment for each other until we do that?
That's great.
And then it kind of changed the whole dynamic of the relationship. And she said, well, you're not like any of the other guys I've ever met. And I said, well, I could have been, but you also kind of went in with preconceived notions.
Exactly.
And I'm not trying to defend, because they probably came in preconceived notions. And I think sometimes we just need to check those attitudes.
Exactly.
And just come in and say, hey, what can we do to help?
Absolutely.
Both ways. And how can I trust that you're going to help too?
I love that.
But back to that medical model. Can I talk about the brain and addiction a little bit?
I would love for you to do that.
And so that's one of the things that I've recognized is we've been doing AA meetings for a long, long time. We have NA meetings. What I've noticed with those in recovery is they're not quite as sure of what's happening in the brain. We talk about coping skills. We talk about all of these different things in therapy, but sometimes just the neurology of addiction and the neuroscience, a lot don't understand. And so if I can take just a short minute to bore to death the whole audience.
No, I
Does
would
that
love
make
it.
sense?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have to understand about addiction is how it does affect your brain, and then how that effect on the brain affects you in recovery as well as decision making. So you have something in your brain called the VTA that's called the ventral tegmental system or area. So that gets hit with drug use.
Right.
And then that stimulates the nucleus accumbens, which everybody knows. We hear that kind of tagline, this nucleus accumbens, which then runs the mesolimbic dopamine system, right?
Right.
And that's the reward pathway. So now we recognize with drugs that we can get 6, 7, 10, 11 times the release of dopamine, which is reward, in that system with illicit drug use than we can with anything natural.
You'd never do it natural.
Never do it naturally, right? So imagine an individual that's been flying that high, just loving life. I remember talking to one of my patients and I said, hey, are you worried about going back to heroin? Are you worried about going to these things? And he said, I can shoot up heroin, be covered in dirt, and be in a gutter, and it's the happiest time of my life.
Wow.
And I said, wow, that's this huge drive, right? And that reward drive is huge. So imagine that. And we understand that. Everybody talks about that. Now what happens is in recovery, especially for me as a detox guy, I'm killing your best friend.
Absolutely.
Like that's my job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is to kill your best friend. Because what do I mean by that? Everybody's thinking, well, no, it's not my friend. It's a drug. No, it actually is, right? It's your only coping strategy at some points in your recovery and at some points in your life. And I take it away.
Right.
So now we go, 6 to 10 times higher than we can get naturally. And I take it away and then everything's gray. Right. And that's sometimes what we have to understand in recovery is one of the reasons recovery is so hard is because everything just feels gray. It's just blah, right? And then there's this progression. Okay, I don't have drugs, and so I move to food, or I move to sex, or I move to these other things, trying to feel that little burst of dopamine in that mesolimbic system.
Right.
And so one of the things that we kind of have to wrap our heads around, and what a lot of science and neuroscience is trying to do, is make that gray period shorter. So that what we call the neuroplasticity of the brain's ability to learn, comes back. And so we've learned through these images of the brain, the fMRIs, right?
Yeah.
That there are these two parallel pathways. And through drug abuse and even sometimes through trauma, they end up coupling together.
Wow.
And we call them firing cascades, but it's actually the physical evidence of a trigger.
Wow.
Right? Isn't that interesting?
That's amazing.
And so what we're trying to do is help the brain uncouple those firing cascades faster.
Yeah.
So that they run parallel again instead of being attached.
That's amazing.
But that's why it's gray, right? Because out of all of the tissue in your whole body, the tissue that heals the slowest or doesn't heal is brain tissue. It's nervous system tissue, right? So one thing is understanding that, yes, at times in recovery, it's gray.
Right.
But you will heal. every day that goes by,
Perfect.
your neuroplasticity increases and it starts
Wow.
to rebound and it starts to recover and the brain will come back. So one, there is hope.
Yeah.
Now, so there's now another aspect to that. When that nucleus accumbens is fired, we talk about that mesolimbic cascade. That's the dopamine. That's the reward.
Yeah.
I feel so good,
Feels
right?
so great. Yeah.
Then we have something that we don't talk about in recovery. And this is what's really interesting. And it's called the mesocortical system. And that mesocortical system actually hits the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, wow.
The front of your brain.
That's
and
a
the
big
front
one.
of your brain is where we choose,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And we make rational decisions. And so now all of a sudden, I want to bring this point into to those of you that maybe aren't in recovery, but you have a loved one that's in recovery.
Absolutely.
So imagine these pathways, right? Firing. So that they're super happy with all of this reward. But now it's also affecting the part of the brain that makes decisions.
Oh, yeah.
And I have so many people that say, well, I'm tired of him loving heroin more than me, or loving alcohol more than me, or she loves this substance more than she loves us as parents. And that's not true.
Yeah.
That's a big lie.
Yep.
The problem is we've put this decision-making part of the brain in a vice.
Exactly.
And they just can't see it.
Can't see it. Yeah.
They can't see the repercussions of actions. Now, this is not to excuse you from your decision-making.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, this is why we make such bad decisions, right?
Absolutely.
This is why we hurt the people we love. And then all of a sudden, what's crazy that I've noticed, when we detox someone, we have physical withdrawal.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But then as they progress through their detox, I've recognized that they have what we call emotional withdrawal.
Exactly.
And that emotional withdrawal's kind of dovetailed into a couple of things. One is we're killing your best friend, right?
Yeah.
We're taking away your coping strategy.
It's over.
But the other thing is that prefrontal cortex wakes up.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they start to remember those decisions. And at the time they felt totally justified in making those decisions.
Exactly.
And now all of a sudden it's woken up and they're going, oh my goodness, what have I done? And I see this despair kind of hit, right?
Exactly.
And I'll tell them through the detox, we're trying to make it somewhat comfortable, but you have to have emotional detox.
Yeah.
You have to have emotional withdrawal because these are the things that you're going to work through in programming and in therapy and through other modalities in which you find recovery in.
Exactly.
And so once people kind of understand that in the brain, it's a little bit easier to say, okay, I can go another week. Right?
Yeah.
Or it's a little bit easier to say, let's try and figure out this relationship that's been stressed or hurt. Because yes, you still made those decisions, but it was hard to see any other decision at the height of drug use.
At the height of drug use. Yeah.
Right.
And that's why so many people get stuck with that, those feelings of guilt too.
Right.
It's like, that wasn't you back then. And I don't think they really understand that part of them that was making those decisions, engaging in that behavior and just running and gunning, that's not them.
Right.
And they don't get that. Does that come into play with this?
Right. And part of it is this. I have a saying that I use often about guilt. Guilt can be healthy.
Right.
It sometimes can drive us into the right treatment. It can drive us into the right arms. It can drive us to where we need to be to heal. What I don't agree with is shame.
100%.
Guilt is just, or shame, I should say. Shame is just untreated guilt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden we're starting to feel shame, it's because that we need to treat our guilt.
Right.
And at the end of the day, sometimes we can justify saying, well, the drugs made me do that. It wasn't really me, which, you know what, honestly, when we're talking about neuroscience, you're right.
You're absolutely right.
But unfortunately, you're going to feel shame if you don't own those decisions and start to work through them and start to repair them. And that's how we treat the guilt.
True,
right?
100%.
And so you're right. Absolutely. You should find hope in the fact that that wasn't 100% you. But if you can take that and you can say, I'm going to own the most that I can at this part of my recovery, and I'm going to start working through it, then all of a sudden you'll feel less shame because you're treating your guilt.
That's so amazing. The brain works in so many mysterious ways. I'm so glad you're explaining this. I was just doing a little bit of research on one of our YouTube videos I'm going to put out, and it talked about how exclusion, like if you're excluded from a group or from a team or for something, you pick last on your kickball team,
right?
That exclusion, still that the pain of that in the brain manifests exactly where, like if you stubbed your toe, it would.
Right.
And so it's weird how so many of these emotional things correlate with the physical part too, because that's where your brain records all those kind of things.
Right.
So as you're reestablishing and kind of uncoupling, both of these pathways and stuff, what treatment do you believe works best? Is it abstinence? Is it sometimes MAT? Is it pure therapy? Is it
Right.
deep psychoanalysis? What is it in your view?
Well, see, and I think that's
To each
part
his
of-
own in a lot of ways, but
right,
yeah.
right. And I think we need to step back, right? And when we look at substance use disorders, now I'm going to make a general statement here, and just for the sake of this discussion.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we'll find kind of three areas that were there or present prior to the substance use disorder.
Right.
One is an undiagnosed psychiatric disorder, right? I remember talking to one where he was at a party and he just felt off his whole life.
Right.
He was at a party. All of a sudden he was handed alcohol and he started pounding this alcohol, and he remembers saying that works.
Yeah, like that's a
Right?
ticket. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that works. He didn't even know what it worked for, right?
Yeah.
But we see often in undiagnosed bipolar 2 or undiagnosed anxiety, they're drawn sometimes when they don't know why they're firing wrong, and they just
Exactly.
don't feel like their brain's working
Yeah,
right.
like, oh, this is different.
Right. And then all of a sudden a substance use disorder manifests because it kind of satiates that need, right? And then it leads to other problems. So that's one category, is an undiagnosed psychiatric condition. Another one is trauma,
Right.
where we were hurt, we were abused, people we trusted violated that trust, and it's a coping strategy.
Right.
And then the other one is there a genetic predisposition?
Yeah.
It's funny to me how often I'll sit with patients and I'll say, did you party with a bunch of guys in high school? Yeah. And how many of there were you? 10 of us. What are they all doing? Well, 8 of them are doctors and lawyers and therapists, and there's
Yeah.
2 of us that have just struggled our whole life.
Whole life.
No trauma, no like severe psychiatric disorders. They just can't seem to get away from this kind of genetic predisposition. Right?
Right.
And so bringing that into what we're talking about is what's the best way to recover. I think, one, you find your recipe.
Right.
And that's super,
Perfect.
super important. But I will say this. I'm going to kind of go off on another tangent with
Do
this.
it. We'll love it.
In the DSM-5, which for our listeners is kind of the psychiatric Bible, right? It lists substance use disorders as a biopsychosocial spiritual disorder.
Yes.
So a lot of times with individuals, I'll tell them that you need to be working in all of those areas.
Yeah.
A biopsychosocial spiritual thing, and it should be daily. And so the bio, my favorite part of bio is exercise,
Exactly.
right? So that's the
Funny.
physical.
Same with ours.
Yeah,
Talk about
right.
that.
Interesting that I'm on this show,
Uh-huh.
right? And there's something that exercise does for the brain, and it is a dopamine release.
Yes.
I run marathons, and I'm a runner, and what's funny is I can't get away from it. I've tried CrossFit, I've tried all these other things, but for me, running it heals my brain. It brings that runner's high. And it's not even like a physical things at times.
Yeah.
It's emotional and mental as I work through stuff.
Agreed.
So physical, do something every day. And at our facility, we make them work out every morning.
It's a beautiful way
So
to start.
yeah, 5-6 days a week, they have a workout period. And even if that's just walking the halls.
Yeah, it's doing something.
You gotta
Getting
do
some
something.
movement.
Right.
Love it.
And so then we get into the psycho, where to me, yeah, that's meeting with the therapist. Maybe that's the EMDR. Maybe that's that, right? But it's also learning something. We have to make a decision daily, right?
Exactly.
So the psycho part for me is learn something, memorize something, lyrics to a song, study something, right?
Love it. Yes.
That 4th step is social, biopsychosocial. So social, what do I mean by that? What's the opposite of connection? Addiction. It's connection, right?
It is.
And so I'll often tell patients you need to connect.
Exactly.
And I don't mean through Facebook. It's awesome. It's good. It's great. I can do good things, Instagram, those type of things, Snapchat. But you need to have a physical connection, eye to eye, where you interact with someone. I live at home alone, great. So go to the store.
Yeah.
Talk to someone that's checking you out. Stop someone in the grocery aisle, right? but you have to connect socially every day.
We are social beings. We have to.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
And that's one of the things I've seen with alcohol use disorder is they have a tendency to isolate.
Yeah.
So that step is super, super important, especially if your drug of choice is alcohol.
Yeah.
Because we get rid of that isolation.
Yeah, you introvert way too deep.
Right.
I gotcha.
Right. And so then that fourth step is the spiritual side. And whatever your higher power is, there has to be a daily connecting there.
Agreed.
So to me, that there's a physical, there's learning, there's that connection, and then there's that higher power. And if we're working on that every day, then honestly, we recover a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
Right?
And you're filling all the gaps.
Right. And not only that, we're developing our recipe
Yeah.
for success as our brain uncouples and the gray starts to go away.
It's the best way I've ever heard it described because, as you're going through that, I'm thinking about Team Addict Athlete and how we help people kind of establish that. I think when you're getting into, listeners, when you're getting into recovery and you're getting into this new realm and this new way of being, following that pattern is a pretty good, strong starting point. And then if you carry it on and become an expert in it, become professional in it, can you guys imagine what your life could become? I mean, that's a really eloquent way of describing that. Instead of just a biopsychosocial we fill out when they come into treatment,
Right.
It really does have meaning and purpose. And that's why they've established those categories.
And that's what I think is important in recovery is we need tools.
Yeah.
Like we need actual real life applicable tools. And we'll go through process groups and we go through different things that is fantastic and we need to do those things. But as we leave recovery or treatment, I should say, into our recovery, what's the tool? What's the tool that's been added to my toolbox?
Right.
And if there's some real life application, I think it helps quite a bit.
So would you say, from what you've seen in your practice at Ardu, the opiate epidemic, all these things, my interpretation of these addictions and the kind of the keys that I love working in addiction because everything's kind of like a little bit of a detective work, right?
Right.
And everything has a meaning and purpose. And you talk about the alcohol and the withdrawal of being not social and those things. I love it because when you start looking at what drug they've used, you can kind of figure out what they're feeling like. So this is my own world according to Blu here. But with people with opiates and stuff, those legitimate pain,
Yep.
Emotional, physical, mental, it hurts, right? Alcohol, marijuana, depression too. It's like that's you guys want to just kind of hide and be gray again. The one that spooks me the most is the anti-anxiety, like the benzos. That stuff scares me to death because I'm like, that's not you're feeling good, you're not feeling bad, you're not feeling anything.
Right.
What have you noticed is kind of the hardest? I don't know if the hardest to treat, but just in your own eyes, is the most sad or the most damaging? Is it the?
Well, I think to a degree, all of them
All
are.
of it is, yeah.
Right. If I could speak to maybe a couple different points on them.
Yeah.
One is that the opioid epidemic that we're facing. I think we can put that into perspective for a second. In 2017, there was in the nation, there were 72,000 deaths from opioids.
It blows my mind.
Yeah. There were 82,000 deaths from alcohol.
Yeah.
So a little bit higher. What was crazy is you put that in relation to smoking, tobacco.
Oh, yeah.
480,000 deaths.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
That is wild.
Right. So we have this opioid epidemic.
You don't hear much
but
about
we
that,
have-
do you? Yeah.
The smoking epidemic, right? But with that opioid, you're right. It's interesting to me how often treating physical pain turns into treating emotional pain.
Right.
And the opioids seem to fill that gap pretty well.
They do.
And you're right about alcoholism is this isolating. I'm not good enough, or there's too much pain, or I want to stay out of society a little bit, and they do. That's a hard one to treat, and I would put benzodiazepines in that.
Yeah. Okay.
Because benzodiazepines actually work on the same system that alcohol works on with the GABA system, right?
Yeah.
And so GABA and glutamate are the two that will function. GABA is an inhibitory, right? So it's supposed to bring us down.
Yeah.
Well, when we take enough benzodiazepines or we take enough alcohol, it actually switches.
Yeah.
So glutamate's excitatory, GABA is inhibitory and brings us
Brings
down. But what's interesting is I'll meet with people that have alcohol use disorder or benzo use disorder, and they'll drink and they get excited. And that tells you when that addiction is starting to take too much of a hold in your life, because what it should be doing is depressing things.
Exactly.
And then when all of a sudden you drink half of a fifth and you clean your entire house.
You're perked up.
Yeah, that's actually when it gets dangerous because you're switching and glutamate is becoming inhibitory, right?
Yeah.
And so medically speaking,
makes a lot of
the
sense.
scariest is the alcohol and the benzos.
That makes sense.
Because physically, that's where seizures and deliriums tremens and different things come into play.
The heavy stuff.
Heavy stuff is really scary. Now, socially, they're all scary.
You're right.
Methamphetamines is really scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of the acute psychosis.
Yeah, I've seen that. Ooh.
Right, it is scary. And so those that are struggling with methamphetamine use, all of a sudden they're not sleeping. Now, we've been talking a lot about the brain. With that methamphetamine use, if your brain doesn't have a chance to sleep, that's when it reboots. So when your phone gets glitchy, what do they tell you to do? Turn it off.
Turn it off. Mm-hmm.
Right? That's your brain turning off at night. And so when we go 4 days without sleep, you start to hallucinate. Yeah. Because you get glitchy, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And so, I mean, we could go through the stories how they're all scary, right?
Exactly.
But it's... Yeah, the stuff online, the videos that always seem to go viral, that's typically methamphetamine.
Exactly.
Because it's acute psychosis, right?
Man, absolutely.
So they once again, but detoxing through methamphetamines can be rough, but it's also, you just sleep a lot.
Yeah.
And you get it all back,
You get
right?
it all back. Mm-hmm.
It's really nice. And so, but the alcohol and the benzodiazepines, yeah, they are scary. Medically scary. Yeah. And so those of you that are listening that have loved ones or you yourself are in that category, you do need medical attention. The cold turkey with that doesn't work. You need to make sure that you're getting the right medical attention because it can be scary.
God, that makes so much sense, And also a point that you brought up a little while ago, about the way that kind of manifests. So those that have never had like significant trauma. And I remember sitting in groups, doing groups many times where there's that one or, a couple of group members that raise their hand. It's like, my addiction's not like these people. I never was abused by my parents. I never had anything happen to me. And I think a lot of times, even us, I know I have as a clinician, have completely missed that genetic factor.
Right.
Because I'm like, well, it's got to come from somewhere, right? It's got you.
Right.
Did you get yelled at by a teacher for spelling a word wrong? And sometimes we miss that. How do you determine, and how does someone get down to the basics, like deep genealogy? I don't know,
right? About
how predisposition works and how to kind of be aware of it if you haven't been.
Well, what's funny is it's some of you may be like me. My dad used to always tell me, "Hey, it's in your blood."
Yeah, I've heard that. Mm-hmm.
And people will say that. And my dad's uncles and even his dad for a while struggled with alcohol use disorder. And so he'd always tell us that as kids, it's in your blood. You can't mess with it. Mm-hmm. And to a degree, we say, oh, this is a scare tactic for parents and grandparents. But realistically, we've noticed that we are isolating more genomes that are saying that there is an addiction gene. There is a predisposition. I think there's a couple different approaches in my mind. One is we've met those people in recovery that think, whoa, I'm not in the same group as some of these people are.
Oh, yeah.
If you've been in addiction long enough, you have trauma.
Exactly.
You've seen things that you probably shouldn't have seen or that are going to be hard on you.
Done things you shouldn't have done.
Right. Yep. But one of the really honest conversations that I think is very beneficial is to have a conversation on what trauma is, but also what capacity is.
I like that.
We don't talk a lot about capacity.
No.
And I think we need to spend more time talking about capacity because what's traumatic for one isn't traumatic for another. Well, why is that? Well, it's capacity.
Exactly.
Right?
I like that.
And some people have, at different times in their life, a larger capacity to handle difficulty.
Exactly.
To handle hard. Mm-hmm. And so hard happens. We have to understand that.
Yeah.
And really, really important for those struggling in addiction right now, if you're listening, hard happens to everyone.
Yes.
If you are alive on the planet, hard is going to happen and it's coming. If it hasn't happened to you yet, it's coming.
It's coming.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people deal with hard through addiction and through substance use. Other people deal with hard through other channels, right? But hard happens. What we need to be honest with ourselves about is what's my capacity?
I love that.
What's my capacity when the hard happens? Because sometimes my capacity is enough and I can work through it and I do it healthy and I do it well. Other times my capacity is not enough. So what do? Do I turn to a substance or do I turn to someone that can help me?
Exactly.
And I do a group called Two Doors. And that's the idea is when my capacity doesn't feel enough and I feel like I'm drowning.
Exactly.
That's the moment we ask for someone that has the capacity to help, right?
Brilliant.
And that's a really important thing because sometimes we isolate ourselves and we get that victim mentality where we say, well, no one else understands. No, everybody does hard. Everybody does hard, right? So now we have to be honest and say, well, my capacity isn't where it should be right now because I'm feeling it.
So how do you teach that?
Help.
I love that because most of the time when you say, are you going to go back to the substance or to a person that has more capacity to help you?
Right.
They look around to their neighbor who's in the same boat and like, will you help me?
Right.
And they're like, no, I can't help you. I love that decision. I love that
right.
premise.
Right. And that's the idea is finding, when we're talking about finding those that can help us, turn to loved ones. Mm-hmm. Loved ones, if they turn to you and you don't feel like you have the capacity, right? Get them in front of people that do.
Okay, so what you're saying is so important, especially for you listeners that have children that might be struggling with this. Parents that don't have the capacity, then turn to guilt because they can't? No, there's people out there that can, right?
Right, and that happens so often, right?
Yeah.
And one aspect we have to bring into this is cultural ramifications, right?
Indeed.
These taboo and, my kids can't have this addiction, or I don't want people to know. Moms and dads. I'm a father of 5 boys. Please understand something.
Bless your wife.
Yes.
Wow.
She's amazing. Please understand something. If your children are turning to a substance to cope, you are not a bad parent.
Yeah.
It is not a reflection on bad parenting or you're not there or this is an opportunity to be a great parent. Absolutely. And that means not to hide it, not to convince them that they don't have it, not to shame them into the back corner bedroom where you're like, well, we're just going to shut you off from the world. It's to get them to people that understand how the brain works, to work through it, to help them heal. And it's not a reflection of you're a bad parent at all.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because that usually, in this area where we are in Utah, right. Sometimes it's looked upon as a family weakness, and it's not.
Right.
It happens a lot. You're serving in the church right now. I was a bishop for a few years. There's some funny things that go on with this, and when that help does come, there's this huge relief. So don't wait.
Right.
Like get into it. Like let's help. The capacity part, though, I've never looked at it that way, but it's true. Because if you don't have it, you can't bring it on board. And one thing I've noticed about everyone I've worked with, all these years I've been doing, it's been for 18 years, the clients that come into us and the people that are struggling typically are the people that have large capacities, and they take on board everyone's stuff. And I've noticed this, and I always say this in the meetings in my groups. I'll say, how many of you guys were the junior therapists of your home? How many of you guys were that with your friends? And every one of them raises their hands. There's got to be something to that about how these guys can take on so much pain, and then at the point where they break, and that's the addiction.
Right. Can I share a story from my youth please. About that? So bear with me. I'm a storyteller, by the way. So
I love it.
I had this experience when I was in high school. I went to California with my good friend. We stayed in his grandpa's beach house. Well, this one day during the middle of the week, very few people out on the beach, overcast for the first part. Then it kind of got sunny. We were walking down the beach and we decided these 2 Utah boys were going to go boogie boarding and body surfing.
All right.
As we were walking down, we saw all of these signs warning of the rip curl and the undertow and all that.
Yeah, danger.
So, right. Mm-hmm. So as we walked out there, an actual lifeguard came up to us and said, hey, don't go in the water.
Yeah.
Don't go out today. It's not safe, that type of thing. Well, obviously 2 Utah boys know more about the ocean than the lifeguard, right?
Precisely.
So we walked far enough down the beach and around kind of this little bluff, and we're all alone. And what do? We hit the water.
Yeah.
And it was like a washing machine. I've never experienced it in my life.
Wow.
And as we're getting out, trying to get to where the waves are breaking, I'm exhausted. Yeah. And so is my friend. And we look up and we're probably 200, 300, 400 yards down the beach already. And so I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Like this might be it, huh?
My arms and legs are weak. And all of a sudden my friend catches a wave in.
Yeah.
And he gets all the way in. And right as I watch him getting in, I get hit with a wave. And I think to myself, okay, I just need to sleep. I just need to take a rest. And next thing I know, I wake up to my arm being kind of pulled above me. And I look up and I see the silhouette of the sun and my boogie board, and it's the safety strap around my wrist, and I'm under the water.
Wow. Yeah.
And I can't move. And I'm thinking, I'm going to die.
This is it. Yeah.
I'm going to die. Okay.
Man.
So those of you that have been in this situation, right? As I sat there, I kind of said a prayer.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to die. Now, at this point of the podcast, I would love to tell you that like the sea parted and I walked on dry ground. And guess what?
Right out, yeah.
It didn't. Or that like angels came down and plucked me from the water and carried me in. Even if I could tell you the miracle that a lifeguard just felt inspired to swim out and find me.
Right.
None of that happened. None of that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided to kick my legs. I decided to kick my arm or use my arms.
Yeah.
I felt blood in my mouth because I was coughing so hard. And I just scraped and I pulled and I kicked and I screamed. And I don't know how, but sooner or later I wound up on this beach.
Oh, man.
Well, as I was kicking and fighting in the water, I looked up and here's my friend running up and down the beach. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? Why don't you come out and save me?
Yeah, come rescue me.
Why don't you come rescue me? And he would run up and down the beach and run up and down the beach. And so I finally get in there. I throw up all of this water and I kind of yell at him and I lay into him, right?
Dude, where were you?
I'm like, where were you?
Yeah.
And he said something I'll never forget. He said, I was trying to find a lifeguard. And as I was running down to find the lifeguard, you would disappear.
Oh, man.
And so then I would run back to try and find you and then disappear. And I said, well, why didn't you just come get me? And he said something I actually love. At the time I really
You're a
ripped him
teenager.
up, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he said, I knew I didn't have the strength to save you, and I didn't see the point in us both dying.
Wow. Powerful.
Powerful,
Man,
right? Now,
yes.
here's the thing. There's a couple things we can learn from that. That's a super, super good lesson about being honest about our capacity.
Exactly.
Right?
100%.
Because there is no reason for you to run into an ocean if you can't for sure know that you can swim out there and pull someone out.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the first lesson we need to understand as those at-home therapists.
Agreed.
You cannot take too much on. When you start to feel the punches, when you start to feel the hurt,
Yeah.
when you start to feel the difficulty, you need to step back and find a lifeguard.
Find a lifeguard. I love
Find
it.
a lifeguard that has the capacity to swim out there, right?
Powerful. Mm-hmm.
Here's the other thing. If we're in the swings of our addiction, if we're in the swings of depression, if we're in the swings of difficulty, it's really common to be like I was, wanting the sea to part.
Yes.
Wanting the angels to pluck me from the water, wanting someone to just show up and rescue. And unfortunately, this is not to me be discouraging, but you got to get up and kick.
Agreed.
You got to get up and work. You've got to get up and make a decision and make a choice and get in front of people that can help.
Agreed.
Right? And so there's two lessons from that about capacity.
Powerful.
I thought my capacity was gone. I had just a little bit more.
Yep.
I think a little bit came from heaven, but I had a little bit more,
Yep.
right?
That's all you needed. Mm-hmm.
He knew his capacity and he knew he didn't have enough in the gas tank.
Wow.
Right? And so that's a really good lesson on be honest with yourself. And if you know you don't have the capacity, find someone that does. Find that lifeguard. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That happens so frequently. There's been so many times. And again, the guilt kicks in. I should have done more. I could have done more. That it really, it's not up to them at that point. It's,
Right.
you know what you can and can't do. And to me, I think, back to situations, where I've had parents that have come in just guilt ridden because they've lost a child, and addiction took them. And the same kind of story unfolds. It's like we didn't have enough and we needed extra help. And at the end of the day, they didn't kick.
Right.
It's kind of a sad situation too, but all in the same breath, it's like, we don't know what we have inside of us until we're in a situation like that either.
Right.
I'm a firm believer too that, we all want people to rescue us, like you say, but I know that the troops aren't coming. We are the troops. We have to do what it takes in order to, to get back to the beach.
Right.
It's an incredible analogy. That capacity part though really resonates with me because of that factor alone. I've noticed that so many times. Even in my own life, right. I'm yes, I'll be there. I'll show up for you. Yes, I'll do that. I'll answer that phone call, do that. And pretty soon my capacity is overflowing and I'm dropping balls. I'm not following through with what I should be doing.
Right. And that's what's really important is capacity is another way of saying do I understand my boundaries?
Exactly.
And we have to make sure that we understand that healthy boundaries are in every relationship.
100%.
And we can't have a healthy relationship without boundaries. And I don't care what the relationship, parent to child, spouses, whatever it is. And so what really comes out is we're starting to understand our capacity. I've learned in my life that I have a greater capacity when I hold appropriate boundaries.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I can do way more. I was talking to my wife about this the other day. I have an ecclesiastical life that's really demanding, and then I practice medicine, and I have 5 sons, and there's all this stuff. And I was talking to her the other day, and I said, I don't feel as much burden as I did years ago.
Yeah.
Like if the stuff that was going on in my life today happened to me 10 years ago, I would be super overwhelmed. I would not be sleeping. And I said, isn't it interesting how it's just kind of life right now, and it's okay. And there's joy and there's happiness. And she challenged that. And she said, well, how are you doing that? Yeah. What do you mean? Yeah. And I had to go through, and I recognized that it's actually holding boundaries in my life. Because in my ecclesiastical life, there's 3,500 people that would love to talk to me. And I can't. Yeah. Right? And I can be there for those where maybe it's a little bit more intense. Yep, maybe it's a little bit bigger, right? Yeah. There's a lot of patients that need attention and time. Yes. But I rely heavily upon my nursing staff. Exactly. Right? And I hold that boundary. And so when we hold boundaries in a healthy way, our capacity increases.
That is awesome.
And so I think when people say, well, where's our boundary? Then you'll find where your capacity is.
That's brilliant. I know that Marissa could probably testify to this. Where were you like 8 years ago when I got called in the bishop, right? Like, that'd have been nice to know, huh? I love that. And listeners, you're being well fed, and this is gonna be one of those podcasts you're gonna want to go back and listen to over and over again. But we're getting close to wrapping up here. But I want to talk to you about that balance part. How do you find the balance? Because like you said, you've got a lot on your plate, and you're busy. How do you find balance? And again, is it the boundaries that you set? What's your key?
I think it's a schedule.
Yeah.
Right.
Live by it.
Remember how we came? Let's circle back. Right. We talked about that biopsychosocial spiritual disorder and how we have those goals. And so I think if we can structure our lives and create good, healthy habits, right, it's our capacity increases.
I love that.
Right. And so I get up at the same time every day, 7 days a week, even on vacation. I run every day. Well, 6 days a week, 6 days a week. Yeah. And so I have your brain, unless we are really coming full circle, because your brain loves habit.
Oh man,
it
absolutely.
loves habit. Absolutely. That's why you can develop a habit in such a short time, but it's really hard to break a habit. Mm-hmm. And so, especially in recovery, as we have a really good schedule that works for us, that we stick to almost like a religion, right? Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden our brain kind of unlocks. Yeah. I struggled just with the titch of ADHD in high school. I didn't do very well. And then I went on a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it was structured enough to where my brain just woke up. Yeah. It just went on fire. It just totally woke up. And I learned how to study. I learned how to do all these things. But what was interesting was I can tell that if I let my schedule slip, mm-hmm, that some of those frustrations kind of come back. Right. That's why I get up at the same time. So I get up every day at 5 a.m. and I study for an hour, and then I exercise for an hour, and then and then the brain says, yes, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. And I've recognized that when I stick to a schedule that works for me. Now, please understand, my schedule is not your schedule.
Exactly.
So when we have a schedule that works for us, when we stick to it, our capacity increases. Yep. And our ability to deal with hard increases, and our ability to deal with burden increases. And we don't feel the punches and the stretching as much as we used to. And so I think one of the practical takeaways is develop a schedule of those 4 things: biopsychosocial, right? Exercise, learn something, make a connection, connect with your higher power every day. And then all of a sudden you'll probably notice your brain kind of unlocks.
Absolutely.
And it wakes up and your capacity increases.
Yeah, I love that, listeners. That's a big part of this, especially if you're raising kids or you struggle with any kind of autism or Asperger's. These schedules are so important because of the routine. It works for us too that don't have those disorders. It works for us as well. And I think sometimes people are wondering why they're so tired or so out of shape or so just dysfunctional. It's like, well, you look at the chaos that is your day.
Right.
Tighten it up a little bit. And it's not normal or weird. It's like, no, it's structured mind is a productive one. It's a good focus. So tell me a little bit about our Do, and if anyone out there is struggling with addiction, how do they get in touch with you? I think that's a good way to kind of move this direction and see what kind of help you guys offer over there.
Yeah, we do. So we do a lot of medical detox, and so a lot of other treatment facilities will actually use us to detox their patients, and so we have a really robust medical detox just because of the fact that the nursing staff and myself came from family practice emergency medicine. And so instead of coming from like a psychiatrist's point of view, we come from much more like a hospital point of view.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of things in our detox that don't happen other places.
Good deal.
And we do IV hydration, and we do a lot of things to try and help people feel comfortable through that time of their detox. The facility is fantastic. We do experiential therapy where every Tuesday they go out into the nature.
Yes.
They go camping once a month.
It's awesome.
And see, I mean, we live in Utah, so
you got to get out there, teach them how to recreate.
Right. And so we have a team of therapists there. I think now we have 5 therapists that work with clients closely and individual therapies. We have family sessions. We do family nights for education.
Very good.
Alumni nights, that type of thing. And then, like I said, our detox is kind of what I set up on that side, was to make sure 24-hour nursing and then kind of pharmacy services and that type of thing.
Very good.
Yeah.
Numbers, email, how do they get in touch?
Ardo.com. The phone number is actually really, I don't know how we got it, but it's awesome.
Really?
It's 801-810-1234.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? So 801-810-1234.
Yeah, 1234 go, right?
Yeah, ardo.com is the website.
I love that. I know that after we do this podcast, there's going to be lots of folks that want to reach out to you. So we'll have to schedule you to come talk to our athlete group over at UVU.
I'd love to.
I think they'd love to hear some of this because it really is. It's an important feature, guys. Family members, anyone struggling, to understand how the brain works through all this stuff. It helps let you know that it's not just a moral issue, that there's a lot of stuff going on in there.
Right.
What would you tell that person out there that's struggling right now or has a loved one that's struggling? What's your message? What do you want to tell them?
Well, I think the overarching message through coming into an addiction world and a recovery world, for me, not having been in recovery myself, is hope.
Yeah.
I really feel it's important that people understand that there's hope. If you're listening, or if you know someone that's listening that feels hopeless, they need to understand that they can tap into a community that is almost like an immediate family.
Yes.
And there are healthcare professionals out there that do love you and care about you and want to help you, but there is hope. There shouldn't be a point where hopelessness overtakes and starts to make decisions for us.
I love that.
Come find hope. And honestly, I don't care if it's at Ardo. I don't care if it's Addict to Athlete. I don't care if what I care about is the hopeless find hope.
Agreed.
Somewhere.
100%. That's what it's all about after all. So athletes, you've been well fed today. Remember to like and share this podcast. Reach out to us, addictathlete.org. If you have any other questions, but until next time, go turn your mess into a message.